To California, and this is just a little brief introduction on my part. And I think the most important thing to begin with here is one of the things that kind of jumped out at us when we first started planning these webinars was what is a rural road? I mean, there's all sorts of rural roads out there. So I want to start a little bit by providing a kind of a definition that we can use as a working definition as we go through this. So what are rural roads? Roads providing access for multiple uses in non-urban resource production and wildlands. And they vary tremendously in terms of their standards, depending on what the ownership are and what the ownerships are, what kind of vehicles are accommodated, and how much traffic volume. Generally speaking, we're talking about roads that carry 400 trips per day or less. So the general focus is on low volume roads with natural rock and gravel surfacing, and there's many, many, many thousands of these miles of these roads in California. So there's several different types that we're going to consider through the webinar series. Permanent all-season use roads, such as county roads. Permanent seasonal use roads, which provide access to recreation sites or maybe logging roads. There's temporary roads and trails. And then there's what we refer to as legacy roads, roads that were created for another purpose in the past, such as railroad grades or wagon trails, and which are now being used for other purposes and may or may not have been designed with those future uses in mind. The ownership and management of these roads varies. Public roads, if you make a distinction between public roads and private roads, we have public roads that are owned and managed by the counties, special districts, state and federal parks, and they generally serve any and all commercial, residential, and recreation uses. Private roads may be owned and managed by companies, individuals, families, homeowners associations, and they are usually accessible only with the permission of the owners. So here's just a few pictures of the kinds of roads we're talking about. On the upper left is a seasonal use road, and you can see it's got a grass surface. It's not used in the. On the upper right, you see a county road next to a stream. Smack dab in the center, you see a pretty much all-season use road on industrial timberland. Lower left, Southern California seasonal use road with a low water crossing, and on the right, a residential road. People are still saying they're having trouble with their volume. I don't know what to do about that actually at this point. Can't really speak much louder. Sorry. Okay, so the webinar background and why we're doing these. Well, rural roads are obviously an absolute necessity to rural communities. Without them, the rural communities don't exist. And there's impacts associated with rural roads, and there's just a tremendous number of them out there. The webinar series was developed by a collaborative of state and federal agencies, NGOs, and UC to provide what we hope is a comprehensive understanding, kind of a baseline primer on rural roads, their environmental issues, the design considerations, and BMPs associated with them. There's 3 series of webinars. This is the first, reviewing environmental effects and concluding with some case studies illustrating some approaches that have been taken to reduce those effects. The second and third series will address road design, road assessment, remedial treatments, and costs for road upgrading and decommissioning. Webinars, this is the first one, May 7th. Next week, we'll be dealing with wildlife and exotic plants. And on the 21st, we'll have our case studies. The next series will be in July, and those will be on design considerations and BMPs. Then in September, we'll be dealing with assessment, remediation, and restoration. Today's presentations will be by Drew Coe from the Central Valley Regional Water Quality Control Board on the hydrologic and water quality impacts of rural roads, and Dr. Michael Wopat from the California Geological Survey will deal with geologic constraints on road design and operation. So the ground rules on this are that each presentation will be 30 to 45 minutes long. The participants, as I mentioned before, can communicate with the presenters and with each other by typing into the chat box. During presentations, viewers may submit questions in the Q&A box, and we're going to save these for response after presentation. At the close of each presentation, viewers may also ask questions. The session will close when there's no more questions or at 1 p.m. We have never dealt with 150 participants, and if all of you decide to ask a question at once, it's going to be a little bit hairy. So bear with us when the Q&A session starts, because we may have to do something quite creative, such as queue your questions for later response. So that's really all I have to say right now. That's my